Hello and welcome to the first tutorial in this series. In this tutorial we are going to start by looking at Photoshop and kind of go over the interface and how things work. It's really a beginning introduction. These are an update to a series I did a couple years ago. There are several new tools, and so when I was going through them I decided it was best just to kind of start from scratch and begin this again for this new semester's course. And so in this Photoshop tutorial series, we're going to learn all of the standard tools and techniques for doing static digital images. And then later in the series, we'll also look at how to use Photoshop as an animation and video and like basic video editing tool. So you can make, you can't really make incredibly long videos with Photoshop, but you can use it to do, shorter things and do some basic manipulation of video clips and things like that. And sometimes it's nice not to transition to another piece of software to do that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you have you probably have Creative Cloud installed on your computer if you're doing this. If you're working in a computer lab at, say, at the university, this is the Photoshop icon. Either on Mac or Windows, you should be able to find that pretty easily on those machines. If you have Creative Cloud, you can open it here. You can also, if you're searching for it on the Mac, you can always click on the little spotlight icon and just type in photo, and usually it will be the first hit that pops up, and so you can open it that way as well. I'm going to be using Photoshop 2021. There might be a couple tools here that don't exist in the earlier version, but it should be a pretty good match. Okay, so I've opened Photoshop up. Hopefully we can all see that. I'm going to increase my screen brightness a bit because I think when I do these tutorials, QuickTime dims it for some reason. I have no idea why. So when it opens up, you get this dialog that tells you that actually has some tutorials listed up top, and there's a whole bunch down below. So they have some of the basic things, and these are things that we'll go through as well in this series, but this is a nice repository as well. And they have, and I believe these are built into Photoshop at this point, so you can actually, it shows you where the tools are and how to do that. So they would be a great addition to the work we're doing. The reason I do this tutorial series is I try to teach Photoshop in a way where you can go reasonably quickly from not knowing how to use it to creating a professional level project in as least time as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do to start with, since this is the first time we've done anything and we're really just going over the interface, we're going to go ahead and click on Create New. And when we do that, it's going to pop up this other dialog and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so it's bigger on your screen, that has a whole bunch of options. You'll notice that there's recent, saved, photo, print, art and illustration, web, mobile, film, and video. And basically all of these things give you some templates to start your work with because they're common sizes and resolutions for your work. Something I want you to note right now is I have this clipboard. If you do a screen capture or or a section of a screen, at least on the Mac, what it does is it has this option of essentially saving it to your clipboard, which is when you copy and paste things. If you copy something, you copy it to the clipboard and then you paste it from the clipboard. Right? And so Photoshop has this option where whatever you last copied is the default thing, which is really nice because you can copy something off the screen, open Photoshop, create a new file that's the size of what you just copied, and then paste it in there, and you're good to go. It's a really quick way to work. But we don't want to deal with anything that was recent. Saved, I have not saved any sizes. But we have photo, print, art and illustration, and then web, mobile, film, and video. The photo and print specifically, and the art and illustration. All of these, you'll notice they give you, in this case, the art and illustration gives you pixel dimensions. And this is a 1,000 pixel grid. This is a 2,000 pixel grid. And you'll note the at 300.ppi, or 300 ppi. What that means is it's 300 pixels per inch. So 300 pixels per inch is sort of is generally like print quality pixel density, right? And so you'll notice that the print section, which has, you know, basically different sizes of paper as the templates. So for posters or other things, or photos, this would work really well. But you'll see those are 300 points per inch. The same goes for photo. And again, these are all like standard sizes that you would find photographic paper in, that you'd be able to go to the output center and print things in. And so there are these 300 ppi. If we go to web, you'll notice that the dimensions look different. 1920 by 1080 is your standard high definition television or monitor. But you'll notice it's 72 pixels per inch, right? And that's the default pixel density for anything that goes on the screen, right? But with printing, you want to be able to have that higher density because it makes the prints look better. Otherwise, they look pixelated and, you know, not quite as strong as they could. And you'll also notice with the mobile, they actually have all these iPhones as presets, and I'm sure they have some other ones as well. We're not going to look at all of those. And then film and video, right? Again, they have the same style, but they're different film presets. And this is great if you're making graphics or other things for film and video that you want to use later. These are good. The difference here is that most of these others default to having a white background, and this defaults to having a transparent background, which just makes it a little bit easier when you export it or save it. You save it with that transparent background, and then you could do titles or artwork on top of something much easier than like having to like delete your background layer and do a couple other steps. And so it really depends on what you're using. We are going to, a lot of the stuff we're going to be doing is not intended for print. But for this first option, let's just go ahead and grab one of these, one of these. We'll just do 11 by 17. Okay, and then under here, there's the preset details. We can change any of these things that we want to as we go. But right now, we're going to leave everything set to the defaults. All we're going to do is just say, name the file. I'm just going to call it tutorial 1. And this little icon here is your save icon. So if I click on that, oh, it's a preset. Sorry, I'm going to leave it alone. We don't want to save the preset. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And when I do this, it should pop up this window. You'll see that there is this white board in the middle here. This is my canvas, right? This is where I can do work on. There are a set of tools down the left-hand side of the screen here. We're going to be using a lot of those all the time. There's also a bar up top here, and this is your tool options for whatever tool you have selected. So right now, I happen to have the quick selection tool selected, and so, which is the last tool I used the last time I used Photoshop. And so it has those options. If I click on the move tool, which is this arrow, this cross arrow here, you'll notice that I have a line of tools there that are specific to that. If I click on the lasso or the eyedropper or the pencil tool, right? All of these different things give me different tools. You should also note that there's a set of menus at the very top of the screen that allow us to do a lot of different things. And then there are more options and tools and properties and adjustments over here. You'll notice there's colors, swatches, gradients, patterns. There's all these different ways I can choose the color of the brush that I'm using if that's the direction I'm going. You'll notice there are multiple tabs in most of these, right? So I have properties. This is the properties of whatever I have selected right now, right? In this case, I just have this background layer selected, and we'll talk about that in a second. but it's there, right? The adjustments are, it's short for adjustment layers. And so we'll talk about layers in a second, but it basically allows you to apply, to modify the exposure. If you've ever used if you've used Snapseed or any other like photo app on your iPhone or on your, on your phone at all, whatever brand it is, some of these icons might look similar because at least with Snapseed, there's a lot of similarities in terms of what you can adjust to tweak an image. And so these, and we'll talk about how those work as we get further on. And then there's this libraries tab. Honestly, I don't really ever use the libraries. There is a search tool that searches for tools, help, etc. There's this other button here that lets you choose a workspace. We're going to start with the essentials, but you'll see that they have a few other workspaces available as well. And each one of these, like if we say go to painting, it's going to adjust what things are up by default, right? You'll notice brushes are up here by default, and it really just adjusts where certain things are. If I come in here and I go to graphic and web, you'll see that again it just adjusts what's up, like character, paragraph, glyphs are up there. So there's several options, but we're going to go ahead and just leave it at essentials. You'll also notice motion. This is one we're going to eventually be working on as well. Working with as well later in the semester. So let's go ahead and just go back to essentials and we'll get cracking. So the way Photoshop works is on this idea of layers, right? And so with Photoshop, you can compose an image of several different images and do work on different layers, right? This allows you to build up a lot of depth, a lot of layers of work, different, maybe you cut out different images and you composite something together. But it allows you a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to go back and make adjustments to something that you've done without those changes being permanent, right? You can, and that allows for a lot of tweaking and a lot of play to happen that would otherwise be stuck in one place. Okay, so we've got our basics here. If we go ahead and go to the paintbrush tool, so if we come over here, you'll see that there is this history brush tool. That's not what we want. We want just the plain old brush tool, which is under the pencil tool in my case, right? So the brush tool, let me go ahead and zoom in on this so we can see. Okay, so I've got my brush tool, pencil tool, mixer brush tool, and color replacement tool. We're just going to use this to kind of to create a couple layers and just do some freeform painting to start with. Most of these initial tutorials are actually going to focus on some of the photo editing and photo and manipulation and compositing tools rather than the painting tools, but we will get into those in a later tutorial. So also notice that there's this B here on the side. That means that the quick key, if I want to get to this tool without going all the way over to the toolbar and selecting it, I can just hit the letter B on the keyboard and that will bring the tool up. Now note that it will bring up whatever tool you have on top. And any of these tools that has this little arrow in the corner means that there are tools under it. So if I just click and hold, it'll pop up this, all the tools that I can reach that are under there. So in this case, I want to make sure I select my brush tool. And when I do that, if I'm over you'll notice that if I zoom back out a little bit, I've got this circle that shows up. And by default, I have the circle. If I click and drag, it's going to, paint something on the screen, right? And this is the basic way that you paint. Now, this brush, there's plenty of different settings that we can adjust on it. We can choose brush type, but I want you to first note the options up on the top bar. So I've selected the brush. And you'll see that even from up here, there's presets, but I don't have any of those presets set, or I haven't used any, so that's not populated. there is this thing that says 150 with a circle under it. This is my brush size in pixels. And so you'll see that if I open that up, it allows me to adjust the size with this slider. I can also type in a numerical value here. The hardness, this is 100% hard. That's why it has this hard kind of jagged edge on it. If I reduce the hardness some to say like, 80% or something like that, and I brush this again, you'll see that that edge seems a lot, granted, it's not perfect, but you'll see that that edge is a lot softer than it was previously. It looks a little bit hazy. And if I reduce the hardness, significantly more, like I'm down to 13% now, right? I'm going to get a much softer, in this case it looks like it's in softer focus, but I get a much softer edge on that brush. It's pretty rare that you want to brush with 100% hardness. You generally want it to be a little softer because it just looks more natural. Along with that, I can also change the brush shape and direction here. So I can, right, so there's lots of options here. So I can make this more like a calligraphic brush, right? So it's got an edge to it. If I click on this little folder here, this allows me to choose to open up this window, and note these icons are also available anytime. But it allows me to choose from a range of preset brushes. It allows me then with any brush that I choose, which, with my current brush looks like that. But I can also, and this is another place where I can increase the hardness and the spacing. I can do this. So right, if I increase the spacing a bunch, then I'm actually going to be drawing a series of dots rather than a contiguous smear of things. Right, you'll notice that there's all these different possible brush shapes that I can use up here. There's a ton of options, right? Photoshop is full of this, and we'll get more into brushes in the future, but some of the other top level changes that are the mode, which we're not going to worry about this right now, but it's how your brush stroke blends with the brush strokes underneath it. And then there's opacity, which is another important thing that we're going to be using all the time with several different tools in Photoshop. And so the opacity, right, we can basically say how dark should this be when I make it. Now note, my brush looks really tiny on the screen right now, and that's because it's now set to 30 pixels. Another way to increase and decrease the size of a brush, and many of the other tools have similar functionality, is to use the opening and closing square bracket or squiggly bracket keys on your keyboard. And if you do the closing one and you tap it or hold it, it will grow the size of the brush. And if you do the opening side, it will shrink the size of the brush. This is another quick key. But now if I set my opacity to, let's just say 45%, and I'm going to come over here to my color picker, and I'm going to go maybe find something awful so I can select the hue here on the side that I want. And then this box here allows me to go from 100% saturation and brightness. Brightness is a value of from white to black, and it's also sometimes known as vibrance. And then saturation is from, grayscale on this side to full saturation on this side of the window. So I'm going to go ahead and, so now that I've set that opacity to 45%, you'll see that, I get this, 50% opaque brush, and I can, as I add, I get more on there. So let's go ahead, and now that we've created this beautiful backdrop, let's go ahead and look at some other features, some other ways that we're going to be working with Photoshop. So one of the things we're going to be doing a lot of is creating new layers, right? It's just a part and parcel for this file. So I'm going to go ahead, and this little plus button down here at the very bottom under the layers menu is create a new layer. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. Now that I've got this new layer, let's change our brush color again to, I don't know, something awful. And I'm going to increase my opacity a bit. And maybe just go ahead and choose some other random brush that you're interested in seeing what it looks like. I'm going to do this triangle pastel. And so now when I do this, you'll see that, right, I've got this other strange brush shape going on. I don't honestly know what I would use this for, but I'm just going to keep painting on here for a little bit, right? So I've got some purple. Let's go ahead and create a new layer and build up on top of that as well. I'm going to do this airbrush soft density, and maybe I'm going to go with teal. I'm going to make the brush size a lot larger by using the key on my keyboard, maybe. Oh no, I guess, there we go. I'm at the maximum size right now for this brush, which is 300, right? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw something else. I'm using my mouse, and notice that some of these brushes take a while to update, right? It takes a lot for Photoshop to draw all of those things on the screen. So now what I want you to note is in my layers panel, whatever layer I had selected most recently is the layer I've been drawing on. And each of these layers has a little icon here that looks like an eye. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And if I click on that eye, it makes the layer, that's the visibility for the layer. And so this layer is no longer visible. Now it's visible again. This layer is no longer visible, right? Now it's visible again. And the same goes for the background. Also note that the background has this lock icon on it. That means that you can paint on it and do things like that, but you can't move it, and it limits certain things that you can do with it. If you click on the lock, you can unlock it, it changes it to layer 0, and it gives you some other freedoms that you wouldn't normally have. And we'll look at that in the future. Also something to note is that each one of these layers has this normal and opacity, right? So just as I can adjust the way that the brush stroke blends with the other brush strokes in my layer, I can also adjust the way that the entire layer blends with the layer below it. So in this case, if I hide the layer 2 and I have layer 1 selected, right? The selected layer is highlighted in lighter gray. If I just go to, say, multiply, or darken, you'll see that the way these colors are interacting with one another changes pretty dramatically based on the blend mode, which is what this is called, right? I'm going to leave it, actually I'm going to make it multiply because that looks kind of cool. And then you can also adjust your opacity. And so, right, so I can make this more or less opaque, right? And so this gives me a lot of freedom as well in terms of how my layers interact with one another. And again, we'll be using these tools in very specific examples going forward. And so there's other settings up here that basically just show us text layers or shape layers or other types of layers. We're not going to worry about the different types until we get to those tutorials. And there's a few other things that we can lock here. And, we'll talk about that as well later, but you can lock essentially the ability to do any work on this, right? So I have this layer selected, and you'll notice now I have this no symbol, right? Which basically means I'm not allowed to paint or brush or do anything else. This allows me, I can paint, but if I can't move the layer, right? Because you can actually move these layers on top of each other. And then there's just this full lock as well. And this other one, if you hover over it, I believe it should say lock transparent pixels, which basically means I can work in the areas where it's not transparent, but not in the areas where it's opaque. Okay, so I'm going to unlock that. So, right, that's one of the main ways that we work. And then there's several other ways we can apply different effects to this, and we'll get into this as we go through. There's this whole filter menu that has a ton of different filters that we can use to modify our images. We're probably not going to get too much into the 3D section of Photoshop in these tutorials, but there are a lot of 3D tools that are available in there now. We don't have any plugins, and most of the rest of these menus we're going to get to as we go on, right? There's the layer menu, and you can see there's a ton of different types of layers and reasons to use layers and things that you can do with them. We'll get on with that. The image layer, here there's some adjustments that are the same as the adjustments here, but you can apply it to the entire image. And you can rotate things, you can adjust the size of the canvas, the size of the image. You can do some auto tone, contrast, and color things. There's just a few more options, and then there's all the editing tools, which we will talk about as we get further along. Right, and then under the File menu, we have the ability to save, close, open new files, do this place embedded or place linked, which we'll talk about in a bit, export things. So the last thing I want to do in this tutorial is just show you how to save a file. I mean, it's the same way you save a file in every other piece of software in the whole known universe. You go down, you go to File, you go to Save, or you hit Command S on the Mac or Control S on the computer to save it. So if I click on Save, by default, I think the last thing I saved was a TIFF file. So it says it's set to TIFF, but what it should usually come up as is just a Photoshop format. And the Photoshop format has the ending PSD. Now, Photoshop files and TIFF files, and there might be one other file type in here that I'm not remembering right now, support layers, right? So they allow you to have all of these layers. And these files get really, really large. So just be aware of that they will get very large. And so typically we want to be saving our files as Photoshop files. However, if you are done with a project and you want this file to be viewable, like you want to be able to say upload it to Instagram or Facebook or post it somewhere else, generally they won't support Photoshop documents. And also TIFF, being another layered file type, is not usually supported by online things. And so usually what you want to do is when you're done with a project, you always want to have your Photoshop document. That should be your working copy. That's the one that you're working on. So let's go ahead and just save that real quick. I'm putting it in a folder for this class. And I'm just going to say, OK, maximize compatibility. And then depending on the file size, it usually tells you how big your file is here. This 165 megabytes is how big it is. And sometimes it will take a while for it to save, but there's this blue progress bar that comes up over here. So then let's say I'm done with this. This is a masterpiece, as you can tell. And so I am ready to, submit this to exhibitions, charge thousands of dollars for this beautiful piece of artwork that I've made. And so in order to do that, now if I'm sending this off to a professional printer, they will likely take the Photoshop document and be able to use it. But if I'm taking it to Copyworks or something like that, I might want to do something else. So if I go ahead and go to Save As, I can come down here and choose any of these other formats, right? JPEG is a common format that everyone should know. PNG is another format that's really common. Both of them are compressed formats, and we'll talk about that a bit more later too. But both of those will work any place on the web. The one big difference between JPEG and PNG is that a JPEG does not support transparency, right? So you can't have a transparent background. That means there's always going to be some sort of rectangle shape with a colored background in it, whether it's white, gray, blue, whatever, it doesn't matter, but it's always going to have that rectilinear shape. Whereas a PNG, if you were, say, making a round logo that you wanted to be able to place on top of any different colored background or have on a website with a different color background behind it or something like that, then a PNG is what you want because it supports transparent backgrounds. Right, so those are the two options. They both work pretty well, but you can just say, click on JPEG. You'll notice it gives you this warning here because layers are not an option. And it says it must be saved as a copy with this selection. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hit Save. And it gives me some settings here. I'm going to leave it with the default and just hit OK. And so now if I go to my file browser, I should have both of those options available. Right, and I should be able to get those. But so that's the basics of the kind of layout and general work of Photoshop. Right, there's not a whole lot to it. Obviously, there's tons of tools here, and we'll get into how to use each of those tools to make really great work. See you in the next one.